The sound of my teacup clinking against the saucer was the only noise in my empty kitchen that morning. 67 years on this earth, and somehow I'd never felt the silence quite like this before. My name is Margaret Peterson, though most folks call me Maggie. I've spent 35 years teaching high school English to kids who thought Shakespeare was boring until I showed them how Lady Macbeth was basically the original toxic girlfriend. These days, my mornings are filled with nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock David bought me for our 20th anniversary and the occasional bird singing outside my window on Cherry Lane. I should probably tell you about David. He was my husband for 42 years until cancer took him 3 winters ago. Heart attack, they said, quick and painless, though I still wonder if that's just what doctors tell widows to help them sleep better. David was the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthdays, even our mail carrier's kids. He'd write little notes on the calendar weeks in advance, underlining important dates in red pen. Maggie's birthday. Flowers from that place she likes. On Oak Street. That's what he'd write. Every single year. Today marks exactly 3 years since I've had to remember my own birthday. Because apparently, when you become a widow, you also become invisible to the people you spent decades raising. My daughters, Rebecca and Emily, both live within 30 minutes of me. Rebecca's the older one at 32, married to a man who sells insurance and has opinions about everything except how to load a dishwasher properly. She's got this little girl, Emma, who just turned 4 and still thinks I'm the best storyteller in the whole world. At least I hope she still thinks that. I haven't seen much of either of them lately. Emily's 28, unmarried, and works 60 hours a week in marketing for some company that makes apps I'll never understand. She used to come by every Sunday for dinner, armed with stories about impossible clients and office drama that reminded me of my own days in the teacher's lounge. But that was before Vicky entered the picture. Victoria, the 24-year-old yoga instructor who married my husband 6 months before he died. Now, I'm not one to speak ill of the dead or their choices, but let me paint you a picture. David met Vicky at the community center, where he volunteered to teach seniors how to use computers. She was there subbing for the regular yoga teacher. Within months, they were engaged. The wedding happened so fast I barely had time to process that my marriage of 4 decades was over. I won't lie to you, it broke something in me. But what broke me even more was watching my daughters accept her. Not just accept her, but embrace her like she'd always been part of our family. Like 42 years of me cooking Sunday dinners and staying up late helping with homework and driving them to every soccer practice and piano recital somehow counted for less than Vicky's perfect Instagram feed and her promises to keep Dad's legacy alive. The funny thing about being forgotten is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's like erosion. Water wearing away stone, so slowly you don't notice until one day you're standing on the edge of a cliff you don't remember being there. First, it was just that they were busy. Rebecca had the baby, after all. Emily's job was demanding. They'd call on my birthday, of course they would. But this year, for the first time in 67 years, my phone stayed silent. I spent the morning gardening, pulling weeds from around the roses David planted our first spring in this house. The dirt under my fingernails felt like accomplishment, something tangible when everything else seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Around noon, I made myself a sandwich and turned on the local news. There was Tom Chen being interviewed about his hardware store's expansion. Good for Tom. We'd been friends since I first moved to Millbrook, back when dinosaurs roamed. The Earth, as Emily used to joke. The afternoon passed in a blur of crossword puzzles and old photo albums. When evening rolled around, I found myself staring at the phone, willing it to ring. By 8 o'clock, I'd convinced myself they were planning a surprise. They'd show up at any moment, Emma in tow with one of her adorable hand-drawn cards. Rebecca would apologize for being late, blame traffic or work or her husband's tendency to get lost even with GPS. Emily would waltz in with takeout from that Chinese place we all love, laughing about something ridiculous that happened at the office. But 8 became 9, and 9 became 10, and the only sound in my house was David's old grandfather clock marking time with its relentless tick-tock. That's when I decided to check my phone. Sometimes texts don't come through right away, especially with Rebecca's ancient phone that she refuses to upgrade. What I found instead of birthday wishes was something that made my blood run cold. Emily had posted a photo on that Instagram thing she's always trying to get me to join. There she was, champagne glass in hand, standing next to Rebecca and Vicky at what looked like an elegant dinner party. The caption read, "Celebrating Victoria's book launch. So proud of our new family author." The photo had been posted at exactly 6:47 p.m. on my birthday, while I was sitting alone in my kitchen, waiting for a phone call that would never come. I scrolled through the comments, each one feeling like another paper cut. Friends and extended family members I hadn't seen in years were congratulating Vicky on her book about finding love after loss, the book she'd written about my husband, about their 6 months of marriage. While my 42 years with him had been reduced to a footnote, if that. But it was the next post that really did me in. Rebecca had shared a collage of photos from the party. There was Emma, my sweet granddaughter, wearing what looked like a new dress, sitting on Vicky's lap. They were feeding each other cake, laughing, like they didn't have a care in the world, like I didn't exist, like today wasn't supposed to be special. I sat there in my dark kitchen, the phone heavy in my hand, and something fundamental shifted inside me. You know that moment in every story where the character realizes they've been playing by the wrong rules? That was me, right then, at 67, years old, realizing that maybe I'd spent too much time being understanding, too much time making it easy for everyone else. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I hadn't slept much, my mind churning through decades of memories and months of gradual exclusion. I made my coffee extra strong and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. The funny thing about being an English teacher is that you believe in the power of words. You believe that the right combination of sentences can change everything, but sometimes the most powerful words are the ones you don't say. Sometimes it's about action. I called James Fletcher's office at exactly 9 a.m. James has been our family attorney since before Rebecca was born. He's seen us through house, purchases, wills, even that weird incident when Emily accidentally sold her car to the same person twice online. His secretary, a sweet woman named Diane who always remembers to ask about my roses, put me right through. "Maggie? Everything all right?" James's voice carried that gentle concern that professionals reserve for elderly clients. It used to make me feel cared for. Now it just reminded me that everyone saw me as fragile, forgettable. "I need to change my will, James. Today, if possible." There was a pause. In that pause, I could hear him shuffling papers, probably looking at his calendar, thinking about lunch meetings and client obligations. "Of course. But Maggie, is there a specific reason for the urgency? Sometimes these decisions are best made after... I've had all night to think about it. Can you see me this afternoon? Say around 3? Absolutely. I'll have Diane clear my schedule. Should I assume this involves your current beneficiaries?" I stared out the window at my garden. The roses David planted looked different somehow. Not dying, but changing, adapting to their new reality without him. "Yes, James. It involves everyone." After I hung up, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed, not in my usual gardening clothes or the comfortable sweaters I wore, for grocery store runs. I pulled out the navy blue suit I'd bought for Rebecca's wedding. It still fit, though it hung a little looser than it had 3 years ago. I styled my silver hair the way David always liked it, pinned back, but with soft waves around my face. I even put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. Before leaving the house, I did something else I hadn't done in ages. I called my old friend Dorothy Williams, who lives 2 houses down. Dot and I used to walk together every morning until her hip replacement last year. Now we mostly wave from our respective gardens and share cucumber surplus in the summer. Dot, it's Maggie. I'm heading out for the afternoon. Would you mind checking on the house later? Maybe around dinner time? Of course, dear. Everything all right? You sound different today. I looked around my kitchen at the phone that stayed silent yesterday, at the photos on the refrigerator that no longer included me. Everything's about to be different, Dot, but I think it's going to be all right. The drive to James's office downtown took me past so many familiar places. The high school where I'd taught for over 3 decades. The little playground where I'd taken the girls when they were small, where Rebecca learned to go down the big slide by herself and Emily figured out how to swing without help. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The church where David and I got married, where we baptized both our daughters, where we said goodbye to him 3 years ago. I parked in the spot right in front of the law office, the one that always seemed to be taken every other time I'd been here. Today, it was empty, like the universe was finally deciding to cut me some slack. The building was one of those converted Victorians that make small towns feel historic and important. James's practice was on the 2nd floor, up a creaky staircase that had probably been original to the building. Diane greeted me with her usual warmth, but I caught her glancing at my dressed-up appearance with some surprise. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Fletcher's ready for you. Can I get you some coffee? Maybe some of those cookies he had catered for the morning meeting? Just water. Thank you, Diane. James's office was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood bookshelves lined with legal tomes, framed certificates on the walls, and that massive oak desk that had survived 3 office relocations. James himself looked like he'd stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Wire-rimmed glasses, gray hair with distinguished temples, the kind of mustache that suggested wisdom and discretion. Maggie, please sit. Now, what's this about changing your will? The last one we drew up seems quite comprehensive. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, crossing my ankles the way I'd taught Emily to do at job interviews. It's comprehensive. For a different life, James. A life where my children consider me part of the family. His eyebrows rose slightly. James had a way of listening that made you feel like every word mattered. It was probably why he was so good at his job. What's happened? Yesterday was my birthday, 67 years old. My daughter Rebecca was too busy celebrating her stepmother's book launch to remember. Emily was there too, posting pictures on the internet of them all having dinner together. My granddaughter was there, dressed up like it was Christmas, sitting on Vicky's lap like I don't exist. I paused, taking a breath. The words felt heavier out loud, more real somehow. David would have never forgotten. But David's gone. And, apparently, with him went any reason for my daughters to remember I'm alive. James leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. Maggie, I've known you and your family for decades. Sometimes people get caught up in their own lives. It doesn't necessarily mean... It means I've been spending my retirement trying to make myself small enough that my presence doesn't inconvenience anyone. It means I've been so afraid of being a burden that I've forgotten I have a right to expect basic consideration from my own children. The silence in the room felt heavy with understanding. James had probably seen this before. Elderly clients, coming to terms with how their families had reorganized around them, like furniture being rearranged in a room to accommodate new pieces. What specific changes do you want to make? He asked, pulling out a fresh legal pad. Currently, everything is split evenly between Rebecca and Emily. The house, the lake property David's father left us, the investments, everything. I want to change that. And the new distribution? I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times since morning. I want to establish college funds for any grandchildren, including Emma. But as for the rest, the house, the lake property. The bulk of the investments, I want them to go to the Millbrook Community Center's education fund, and to Tom Chen's hardware store expansion fund, and to the local library's literacy program. James stopped writing. Maggie, that's a substantial redistribution. Your estate is worth considerable money. Are you certain you want to leave your daughters out entirely? I'm not leaving them out entirely. They'll each receive $10,000. Enough for a nice vacation, maybe. Enough to know that I didn't forget them, even when they forgot me. Have you talked to them about how you feel? Sometimes these misunderstandings can be resolved with a simple conversation. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the past 3 years. How I'd bitten my tongue when they accepted Vicky into the family so quickly. How I'd smiled and nodded when they started calling her mom to little Emma. How I'd never once complained about being gradually edged out of family gatherings and holiday planning. I spent 35 years teaching teenagers how to express themselves through writing. I think it's time I practiced what I preached. This is my expression, James. This is my essay on what family means and what happens when we take people for granted. He looked at me for a long moment, then resumed writing. All right, I'll need to ask you some questions to ensure we get everything exactly right. First, let's confirm the current assets. We spent the next hour going through every detail. The house on Cherry Lane with its established garden and renovated kitchen. The lake house that had been in David's family for generations, where we'd taught both girls to swim and paddle canoe. The retirement accounts I'd been carefully growing since I first started teaching. The life insurance money from David's passing that I'd never touched. Each asset represented a decision, a memory, a piece of the life I'd built and they'd forgotten. As we wrapped up, James handed me the preliminary documents to review. I'll have these finalized by tomorrow morning. Are you sure you don't want to take a few days to think this over? I've been thinking about it every day for the past year, James. I just didn't realize until yesterday that thinking isn't enough sometimes. Sometimes you have to act. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, exactly, but clarity. Purpose. The afternoon sun was warmer than it had been all spring, and I decided to walk the long way back to my car. Past the high school where young people were getting out of afternoon activities, backpacks, slung over their shoulders, laughing about things only they understood. Past the library where I'd spent countless hours helping struggling readers find the joy in books. Past the community center where David had met Vicky, where irony had that particular cruel sense of humor it's famous for. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. Emily's voice, cheerful and quick. Hi, Mom. Sorry I missed your birthday yesterday. Work has been insane, and then we had that party for Vicky's book. I'll call you back later this week. Love you. I played it 3 times, listening to the casual apology, the mention of that party, like it had been some random event, not a celebration that fell on my birthday. The promise to call later this week that we both knew might stretch to next month. The love you that felt like punctuation rather than sentiment. I deleted the message and went out to my garden. The roses were budding now, those tight little fists of promise that would bloom in their own time. I had some weeding to do, some trimming. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, James would file new papers that would change everything. But today, right now, I had roses to tend to. As I knelt in the dirt, my phone buzzed with a text. Rebecca this time. Mom, forgot to send this yesterday. Happy belated birthday. Emma drew you a picture but spilled juice on it. Will send when she makes another one. Miss you. I read it twice, then picked up my trowel and got back to work. The funny thing about gardens is that they don't need you to remember them every day. They grow anyway. They bloom anyway. They survive, even when you forget to water them occasionally. But people aren't roses. People need to be tended to consistently. People need to know they matter, especially when the seasons change and everything else seems uncertain. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, I thought about tomorrow. About the papers James would file. About the surprise my daughters would get when they finally realized that taking someone for granted costs more than they'd imagined. But mostly, I thought about how sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest realization that you deserve better than being an afterthought in your own life. 3 weeks had passed since I'd signed the new will. 3 weeks of keeping my own secret, watching life unfold as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The papers were filed. The legal framework had shifted beneath my daughters' feet like tectonic plates they couldn't feel moving yet. I'd always imagined that making such a drastic decision would feel dramatic, perhaps painful. Instead, it felt like finally adjusting a picture frame that had been hanging crooked for years. My new routine had settled into something surprisingly comfortable. Tuesday mornings at the library, where I'd started leading a workshop for people learning English as their second language. Thursdays, volunteering at the food bank, where I discovered I had a talent for organizing canned goods in ways that made shopping easier for families. Friday afternoons, teaching seniors how to use smartphones at the community center, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on me given where David and Vicky had met. Tom Chen had been right about one thing when I saw him at the hardware store last week. He'd looked at me carefully, in that way old friends do when they sense something different, and said, "You seem lighter, Maggie." I'd bought a new trellis for my climbing roses, and he'd insisted on carrying it to my car himself, despite my protests. "You know," he'd said, leaning against my car door before I could close it, "I never asked what happened to make you change things, but I see it in your eyes. Whatever it was, you handled it right." Tom was one of the few people who knew about the will changes. James had required witnesses, and Tom had immediately volunteered. He'd sat in that law office, reading every page carefully, and when James had asked if he had any questions, Tom had simply said, "Sometimes the people who love you most are the last ones to see when they're hurting you." The funny thing about secrets is how they change the way you interact with the world. When Rebecca called to tell me she'd finally gotten that promotion at the real estate firm, I found myself calculating how much of her windfall inheritance would help with the mortgage she was always complaining about. When Emily texted photos of her new apartment with exposed brick walls and high ceilings that screamed expensive, I wondered if she'd budgeted for the security deposit or if she'd been counting on eventual family money. These weren't bitter thoughts exactly, more like observational. Like I was watching a play where I knew the ending, but the characters were still performing the middle acts with complete conviction. It gave me a strange kind of peace, this knowing, this understanding that their shock, when it came, would be educational rather than punitive. The first real test came on a gray Tuesday morning in March. Vicky hosted a family brunch at her house in Blue Hills Estate, and somehow I found myself invited. The invitation had come through Rebecca, casual as always. "Mom, Vicky's doing brunch Sunday. Can you make it? Emma's been asking about you." I'd almost said no. The thought of sitting at Vicky's table, in the house my husband had shared with her for 6 months, felt like swallowing glass. But then I remembered something my mother used to say. Sometimes you have to show up to understand why you left. The drive to Blue Hills took me through neighborhoods that got progressively more manicured. David had never cared about status symbols, but apparently, Vicky had other ideas. Her house was a sprawling colonial with a circular driveway and more square footage than seemed necessary for one person. The lawn was professionally maintained, the kind of perfect green that only comes from regular treatments and dedicated sprinkler systems. I parked behind Emily's car, noting the new inspection sticker. At least she was keeping up with maintenance. That was good. Rebecca's minivan was there too, complete with car seats and the inevitable collection of goldfish crackers ground into the floor mats. Some things never changed. Emma answered the door, a streak of blonde energy that crashed into my legs with the force of a small hurricane. "Grandma Maggie, you came." Vicky made pancakes, but they're weird ones with green stuff in them. "Spinach pancakes, sweetheart," Vicky called from somewhere inside. Her voice had that practiced cheerfulness that reminded me of morning talk show hosts. They're nutritious. The house smelled like expensive candles and coffee. Everything was decorated in neutrals, beige, cream, taupe, like a magazine spread for people who'd never spilled anything in their lives. David would have hated it. He liked color, chaos, the kind of lived-in spaces that told stories. Rebecca appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mom, you made it. We weren't sure you'd come." She hugged me, and I caught the scent of that lavender hand lotion she'd used since college. Some things, at least, remained constant. Of course I came. Emma specifically requested my presence, and I don't disappoint my granddaughter. I said it lightly, but we both heard the undertone. Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Emily emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, looking like she'd rolled out of bed and thrown on the first thing she found. Some things never changed. "Hey, Mom, did you see the pictures from Vicky's book event last week? It was incredible. They're already talking about a second printing." "I must have missed those pictures," I said carefully. We all knew exactly which pictures I'd missed and when. Vicky glided into the room like she'd been choreographed. At 24, she moved with that fluid confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. Her yoga instructor body was wrapped in flowing athleisure that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She air-kissed my cheek, and I caught the scent of something expensive and floral. "Maggie, I'm so glad you could join our little family gathering. We missed you at the book launch." Her tone was saccharine sweet, but her eyes held something else. Calculation, maybe, or assessment. "I had a lovely evening at home with my roses," I replied, accepting the coffee she offered. It came in a delicate china cup, the kind meant for display rather than actual use. The brunch was exactly what I'd expected. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They talked about property values and spin classes, about Emma's preschool and Emily's latest dating disasters. Vicky shared anecdotes about her book tour. Apparently, finding love after loss was a popular topic at women's book clubs across Michigan. I watched Emma carefully piece together her spinach pancake, creating architectural wonders with syrup and butter. She'd inherited David's engineering mind, even at 4. Rebecca fussed with her phone, probably checking listings or responding to client emails. Emily debated with Vicky about the merits of hot yoga versus traditional practice. It struck me that I was simultaneously in the center of this family gathering and completely peripheral to it, like a piece of furniture that everyone unconsciously navigated around without really acknowledging its presence. "The book is doing so well," Vicky continued, "that we're thinking about starting a foundation. To help other people navigate grief and new love. David would have wanted that." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. Would he? The question hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Rebecca glanced up from her phone. Emily paused mid-chew. Even Emma, attuned to shifts in adult energy, stopped playing with her food. "Of course," Vicky said smoothly. David was always passionate about helping others. Yes, he was. He volunteered. At the library, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. He drove elderly neighbors to grocery stores. He mentored struggling students at the high school. All without fanfare or foundations named after him. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone realizes a conversation has veered into dangerous territory, but no one knows how to redirect it safely. Emily cleared her throat. "The foundation would just be one way to honor his memory, Mom. It's not like we're trying to erase what he was like." "Aren't you, though?" The words came out before I could stop them. 3 weeks of watching and waiting had built up more pressure than I'd realized. Because from where I sit, it seems like we're rewriting David's story entirely. Your father spent 42 years building a life with me, and now it's been condensed to a footnote in someone else's love story. Rebecca set down her fork. Mom, that's not fair. We're not trying to… Rebecca, when was the last time you visited your father's grave? I interrupted. Not with me. Not as part of some planned family obligation. When did you last go there, just you, to talk to him? She blinked. I don't know. A few months ago, maybe? Emily? My younger daughter had the grace to look uncomfortable. I've been busy, Mom. Work and everything. Everyone's busy, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. That's not the issue. The issue is that we're all so busy creating new traditions and new family dynamics that we've forgotten to honor the old ones, and the old ones included me. Vicky leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped together. Maggie, we've never forgotten you. You're part of this family. That's why you're here today. I'm here because my granddaughter asked for me, I corrected. But thank you for clarifying my place in the hierarchy. Emma, who'd been watching this exchange with the intensity of a child who knows something important is happening but doesn't understand what, suddenly spoke up. Grandma Maggie, why are you sad? The question broke something in me, but not in a bad way. It was like opening a window in a stuffy room. I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just adjusting. Like when we have to change our plans because of rain. Are you mad at Vicky? Kids. They cut straight through all the adult politeness to the heart of things. No, Emma, I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just learning how to be a grandmother in a world that looks different than I expected. Rebecca reached out to touch my hand. Mom, we know this has been hard for you. When he remarried, we all had to adjust. Maybe we didn't do the best job of including you in that adjustment. Maybe, I repeated softly. The word contained years of maybe. Emily stood up abruptly. You know what? Let's not do this here. Not now. We're supposed to be having a nice family brunch. Absolutely, Vicky agreed quickly. More pancakes, anyone? Or I could make eggs. Maggie, how do you like your eggs? I looked around the table at these people I loved, who loved me back in their own distracted way. At Rebecca trying so hard to balance everyone's feelings. At Emily desperate to avoid conflict. At Vicky playing hostess in a house that my husband had never truly lived in. At Emma, innocent and confused, caught in the middle of adult complications. I should probably get going, I said, standing up slowly. My joints protested slightly, a reminder that I was, in fact, nearly 70. Thank you for inviting me. Vicky, the pancakes were interesting. Rebecca stood too. Mom, don't go like this. We can talk more, figure things out. There's nothing to figure out, sweetheart. I just need some space to think. And you all need time to enjoy your brunch without walking on eggshells around me. I kissed Emma's forehead, breathed in that particular scent of childhood, syrup, sleep, and innocence. I'll see you soon, my love. Maybe we can go to the playground this week, just the two of us. Just us? Emma brightened considerably. Just us, I confirmed. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't try to fill the silence with chatter or music. Sometimes you need quiet to process the noise in your head. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Cherry Lane, I'd come to a decision. I called Tom Chen as soon as I got inside. Tom, it's Maggie. Do you have plans this afternoon? Nothing. That can't be moved. What's on your mind? I'm thinking about building something. Something for the garden. A memorial bench, maybe, or a small meditation space. You know about woodworking, don't you? I know enough, he said carefully. This wouldn't be for David, would it? No, I said, looking out at my yard where the afternoon sun was painting everything in golden light. It's for me. For the person I was before I started waiting for other people to remember I exist. Tom was quiet for a moment. I'll be there in an hour. And Maggie, I think this is a good idea. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea. The house felt different somehow. Not empty exactly, but expectant, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. I thought about the conversation at brunch, about all the things that had been said and all the things that remained unspoken, about how we can love people and still lose sight of them, about how family can be both the most important thing in your life and the source of your greatest disappointments. But mostly, I thought about Emma's question. Grandma Maggie, why are you sad? The truth was, I wasn't sad anymore. Sad implied a sense of loss mixed with helplessness. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally admit that happiness isn't something other people can give you or take away. It's something you have to build for yourself, board by board, like Tom and I would build that garden project this afternoon. When he arrived, Tom didn't ask for explanations or emotional processing. He just showed up with his truck full of tools and a thermos of what he called construction coffee, strong enough to raise the dead. "What are we thinking?" he asked, surveying my backyard. "A bench? A pergola? A treehouse for Emma?" "Something. Permanent," I said. "Something that says this space belongs to me, not to ghosts or memories or other people's expectations." Tom nodded slowly. "I know just the thing." We spent the afternoon measuring, planning, laughing. Tom told me about his own family dramas, a son who'd moved to California and called once a year, a daughter-in-law who'd never quite accepted him. We talked about aging, about the strange way time speeds up when you realize you have more years behind you than ahead of you. "You know what I think?" Tom said, holding one end of a measuring tape while I held the other. "I think your girls have forgotten that parents are people too. They see you as mom or grandma, but they've lost sight of Margaret Peterson, the woman who exists beyond those roles. Maybe I forgot that too," I admitted. "Maybe I've been playing small to make room for their big lives." "Well," Tom grinned, "looks like that stops today." By the time we finished, the sun was setting behind my neighbor's house, painting the calm sky in impossible colors. We'd planned out a raised garden bed with built-in seating, something substantial enough to be a focal point, but practical enough to use daily. Tomorrow we'd start building, but today had been about more than landscaping. After Tom left, I made myself dinner. Pasta with pesto, ingredients I'd grown myself. I ate slowly, without the television or radio for company. Just the sound of my own thoughts, clearer now than they'd been in years. The phone rang just as I was finishing the dishes. Rebecca's name appeared on the caller ID. "Mom, I wanted to apologize for today. I think we've all been a little thoughtless about your feelings, about how hard this must be for you." "Rebecca, you don't need to apologize. We're all just doing our best in a situation none of us asked for." "But Mom, you're right about visiting Dad's grave. I haven't been there in too long. Would you like to go together this week? Maybe bring flowers?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear, and thought about it. I would like that. But Rebecca? Yes? Let's just let it be the two of us. No Vicky, no Emily, no agenda. Just a daughter and her mother remembering, the man we both loved. There was a pause, then quietly, "Just us." "I'd like that too, Mom." After we hung up, I walked through my house, turning off lights, checking locks, going through the evening routine I'd perfected over 67 years. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, I wasn't closing doors. I was opening them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Emily would probably call, wanting to smooth over the rough edges of the day. Vicky might reach out, attempting to rebuild whatever bridge I'd burned at brunch. And that was fine. Those conversations would happen when they happened. But tonight, I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea and started reading a book I'd bought months ago, but never opened. It was about women who started new chapters in their lives after 60. Fiction, but the kind that felt true enough to matter. As I read, I found myself making mental notes. Not for future conversations or confrontations, but for all the things I wanted to do with whatever time I had left. Learn to paint watercolors, take a cooking class focusing on cuisines I'd never tried. Maybe even plan a trip somewhere I'd always wanted to go, Scotland perhaps, to trace genealogy on my mother's side. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, startling me from my thoughts. David had wound that clock every Sunday night, a ritual I'd continued after his death out of habit. But as I got up to wind it that night, I decided to let it run down. Some traditions were worth keeping, but others could be retired. Making space for new rituals, new ways of marking time. Looking back, I think that was the night I really began to let go. Not of David, not of my love for my daughters, not even of my disappointment with how things had unfolded. I began to let go of the version of myself that waited for others to define my worth. The will remained unchanged. The papers were filed. Nothing in my practical circumstances had shifted since the day after my birthday, but everything in my internal landscape had undergone a seismic transformation. I went to bed that night thinking about tomorrow's garden project, about Rebecca's promise to visit the cemetery, about Emma's innocent questions and Tom's steady friendship, about all the ways life could surprise you when you stopped looking backward and started building forward. The last thought I had before sleep claimed, "Me was this. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love isn't dramatic at all. Sometimes it's as simple as deciding you matter enough to take up space. And space, I was learning, was something I had in abundance. I just had to claim it." Summer arrived with an unexpected gentleness that year. The kind of weather that makes you want to sit on your porch with iced tea and watch the world go by at a slower pace. My garden project with Tom had evolved beyond a simple memorial. We'd built 3 raised beds forming a semicircle, each at a different height for accessibility, connected by a path of reclaimed brick. The centerpiece was a wrought iron bench we'd found at an estate sale, painted deep green to match my shutters. But the real transformation wasn't in the landscaping. It was in how I'd begun to fill my days. The English as a second language program at the library had grown from 6 students to 15. Maria, a young mother from Guatemala, brought her twins some mornings when childcare fell through. They'd color quietly at the back table while their mama learned verb conjugations. Hassan, an engineering student from Syria, worked through technical manuals between classes, desperate to pass licensing exams that would let him practice his profession here. Teaching them reminded me why I'd loved education in the first place. Not the grading or the administrative meetings or the parent-teacher conferences where everyone pretended their teenager was perfect, but this, the moment when understanding dawned in someone's eyes. When language barriers crumbled and connection happened. "Mrs. Margaret," Hassan said one Tuesday, staying after class to show me something on his phone. I passed. The first exam. Because of what you taught about reading technical specifications. I hugged him. This young man who'd fled his country with nothing but determination and dreams, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just usefulness, but purpose. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else recognizing it. Rebecca had kept her promise about the cemetery visits. We'd been 3 times now, always on Wednesday afternoons when Emily was at her most demanding work, meeting and couldn't join even if she wanted to. The first visit had been awkward, full of silences neither of us knew how to fill. By the third, we'd found a rhythm. "I think I've been avoiding coming here," Rebecca admitted, kneeling beside David's headstone to arrange the daisies we'd brought. "Not because I don't miss him, but because of the guilt, I guess." "Guilt?" She sat back on her heels, her real estate agent confidence stripped away to reveal something more vulnerable. "For accepting Vicky so easily, for wanting to move forward, for not protecting your feelings better." I handed her the small gardening trowel I'd brought to clean around the base of the stone. "Rebecca, your dad wouldn't want us frozen in grief. We both know that. And Vicky, she was good for him in those last months. I've never denied that. But But your father's death didn't erase our marriage, and accepting someone new doesn't mean pretending the old never mattered. We worked in companionable silence for a while, clearing weeds and placing fresh flowers. Rebecca shared stories about Emma's latest preschool adventures, about the house she was trying to sell to a young couple expecting their first baby. Normal things. Daughter and mother things that had nothing to do with death or remarriage or complicated family dynamics. On our way out, she stopped at the cemetery gate. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." Are you okay? I mean, truly okay? Because sometimes you seem different now. Stronger maybe, but also further away." I thought about how to answer that, honestly. I'm becoming the person I was before I spent 3 years trying to make myself smaller for everyone else's comfort. And sometimes that means I can't be the mother you're used to having. What does that mean? It means I can't always smooth over the awkward moments or pretend everything's fine when it isn't. It means I'm going to speak up when something bothers me instead of swallowing it down. Rebecca nodded slowly. I think I need to be different too. We all do, maybe. That evening, I was deep in a new watercolor painting attempt. My flowers looked more like abstract color blobs, but the process was soothing when the doorbell rang. Dorothy Williams stood on my porch, holding a covered dish and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I made too much lasagna again," she said, which we both knew was dot speak for, "I wanted an excuse to check on you." Over dinner, she told me about her daughter's latest divorce drama, about the new family next door with teenagers who played music too loud, standard neighborhood gossip. But then she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Maggie, Jim Henderson at the bank mentioned you'd made some changes recently. Legal changes." I kept my expression neutral. Small towns and gossip traveled, at roughly the speed of light. "Did he now?" "He did, and good for you." She reached across to pat my hand. "I want you to know something. After Harold died, I spent 2 years waiting for my kids to remember I existed. Waiting for them to call, to visit, to invite me to things. You know what I learned?" "What?" "That waiting makes you bitter, but choosing makes you strong." We finished dinner talking about her plans to join a quilting circle and my upcoming interview at the community center about starting a writing workshop for seniors. Normal things for women our age, except they felt revolutionary. Like we were both conspiring to claim space in a world that often suggested we should be gracefully disappearing. After she left, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, in my bedroom. When had I stopped really looking at myself? Not just checking that my hair wasn't too wild or my clothes matched, but really seeing the woman in the reflection. I was 77 years old. My hair was fully silver now, cut in a style that framed my face rather than trying to recapture youth. My hands showed liver spots and wrinkles, evidence of decades spent gardening and teaching and living. My eyes looked clearer than they had in years. The phone rang just as I was settling into bed with my book. Emily's name on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer, not out of spite, but because I'd learned that late-night calls from Emily usually meant she needed something and had finally run out of other options. "Mom?" Her voice was different somehow. Smaller. "I know it's late, but I've been thinking about something all day and I couldn't wait until morning." "I'm listening." "I think I've been a terrible daughter." The admission hung in the air between us. I waited, giving her space to continue. Not intentionally terrible, but thoughtless, self-absorbed. I've been so focused on my own life, my own problems, that I forgot you were going through your own adjustments. And then we threw Vicky into the mix and just expected you to roll with it. Emily. No, let me finish. I've been thinking about Dad's last year, about how happy he seemed with Vicky, but also about how that must have felt for you. And instead of talking about it, Instead of acknowledging how complicated that was, we all just pretended it was simple. I set my book aside and pulled my blankets up higher. What made you think about all this tonight? I had coffee with Rebecca after work. She told me about your cemetery visits, about things you'd said. And I realized we've been treating you like you're supposed to be a supporting character in everyone else's story instead of the main character in your own. That's very insightful, sweetheart. I work in marketing, Mom. My job is literally to see how stories are told and who gets to be the hero. She laughed, but it sounded watery. I don't like that I only just figured this out about my own mother. We talked for nearly an hour. Really talked. Maybe for the first time since David's death. Emily told me about her new apartment. Yes, but also about the loneliness that came with trying to build a life in a city where everyone seemed to have it figured out except her. I told her about my classes, my garden, the strange contentment I'd found in building something just for myself. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you change your will because you were angry with us? The question was so direct, so unlike Emily, that it caught me off guard. How did you... Dad's attorney's wife mentioned something to someone at the Women's Professional Network. You know how these things travel. I took a deep breath. Another secret out in the open. I changed it because I realized I'd been making decisions based on expectations rather than reality. Based on who I hoped you'd be rather than who you were showing me you were. And now? Now I'm still deciding who I want to be and what kind of legacy I want to leave. The will isn't set in stone, Emily. None of this is. She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then, softly, I'm coming home next weekend. Not for Sunday dinner or a family event. Just to see you. Just the two of us. Would that be okay? I'd love that. After we said goodbye, I lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. Change, I was learning, wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a series of small adjustments, tiny course corrections that eventually led you somewhere entirely new. The next morning brought a surprise visit from an unexpected quarter. I was watering my new garden beds when I heard footsteps on the front walk. Vicky stood there looking less like a yoga instructor and more like a woman who'd spent the night thinking hard about something. Maggie, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I turned off the hose and gestured to the kai bench Tom and I had installed. Please sit. She perched on the edge, hands clasped in her lap. Today's outfit was casual, jeans and a simple blue sweater that made her look more approachable. Less like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the brunch, about things you said, about things I hadn't noticed before. I waited, bucket and gardening gloves still in hand. I think I may have been insensitive. Not just at the brunch, but in general. About how my relationship with David affected you. About how integrating into the family probably felt like erasure for you. Vicky, I don't think... Please, let me say this. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm 24. I lost my father when I was 12, and I never really processed that grief. When I met David, he filled something I didn't even know was missing. I fell in love so fast, so completely, that I didn't consider the wake my happiness might leave behind. The honesty surprised me. I set down my bucket and sat on the other end of the bench. The book launch party, she continued. It never occurred to me to check the date, to consider that planning a celebration might conflict with something important. For your family. That's exactly the kind of thoughtlessness you were talking about. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a cardinal argue with a blue jay over claim to the bird feeder. I appreciate you coming here, I said finally. And I appreciate your honesty. But Vicky, you don't need to apologize for loving my husband. The issue was never that you existed. The issue was that in acknowledging your pain, everyone forgot about mine. How do we fix this? I looked at her, this young woman who'd inherited a complicated family along with David's love, and felt something soften in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, because I wasn't sure I needed to forgive anyone. More like understanding. We don't fix it. We just do better. We acknowledge that family is complicated and messy, and sometimes everyone hurts each other without meaning to. We remember that grief isn't a competition and love isn't finite. She nodded, and I saw David. In the gesture, it was the same thoughtful tilt of the head he'd do when considering something important. Would you... She hesitated. Would you be willing to read my book? I've been so focused on promoting it that I never asked if you wanted to see how I wrote about David, about us. The question caught me unprepared. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. That's okay. I want you to know the offer stands. Whenever you're ready, if you ever are. After she left, I spent the rest of the morning in my garden, thinking about grief and grace and the messy reality of blended families. No one was the villain here. We were all just people trying to navigate loss and change in imperfect ways. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned on. I drove to the bookstore downtown and bought Vicky's book. Not to read immediately, but to have. Because part of moving forward meant acknowledging all the pieces of the past, even the uncomfortable uns. The bookstore owner, Mrs. Hendricks, recognized me immediately. "Maggie, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you holding up?" Small-town questions came loaded with subtext. She meant, how are you dealing with David's death, with his marriage to someone half his age, with being widowed after 42 years? I'm writing my own story these days, I told her, handing over my credit card. Different chapters than I expected, but still my story. She wrapped the book in brown paper without being asked, a courtesy that felt like its own form of kindness. At home, I placed the unopened book on my nightstand. Someday I'd read it. When I was ready to see my life through someone else's perspective, when I was secure enough in my own narrative that someone else's version couldn't threaten it. By evening, I had 3 missed calls. One from Rebecca confirming our next cemetery visit, one from Emily confirming her weekend visit, and one from James Fletcher. "Maggie, I wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some discussion about your will changes. The girls have been asking questions." Let them ask. Are you sure this is the approach you want to take? Sometimes family conversations happen easier before legal actions begin. I looked out my kitchen window at my transformed garden, at the evidence of my own choosing. James, I've spent 3 years having conversations that went nowhere. Sometimes actions speak louder than words. And if they're hurt, if this damages your relationships further, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I've learned something important. You can't protect other people from the consequences of their own inattention. Sometimes hurt feelings are necessary for growth. After I hung up, I made myself dinner and settled in to work on a new writing workshop outline. Tomorrow, I'd meet with 15 seniors who wanted to learn how to capture their life stories on paper. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, teaching other people how to write their truths while still navigating my own. But that's how change happens, isn't it? Not in clean, straightforward lines, but in circles and spirals and sometimes backslides. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but always moving towards something clearer, more honest, more fully yourself. Late that night before sleep came, I did something I hadn't done since David's funeral. I pulled out our old photo albums and let myself remember. Not with pain or longing, but with gratitude. 42 years of laughing, arguing, building, struggling, celebrating, mourning, and loving. No one could take that away, not even 6 months of passion with someone else at the end. I touched the photos of us in our 30s, exhausted new, parents trying to figure everything out. In our 40s, more confident, hitting our stride. In our 50s, with the girls mostly grown, rediscovering each other. In our 60s, silver starting to show, still holding hands at Emma's second birthday party just months before the diagnosis that would change everything. When I finally closed the album, I wasn't sad. I was complete. The story with David had ended, but my story was still being written, and tomorrow would bring new pages, new words, new ways of being in the world. I turned off the light and settled into bed, listening to the familiar sounds of my house at night. But tonight they sounded different, like approval, like possibility, like a story that's just getting to its best chapter. The call came on a Thursday morning in October, just as the first frost was threatening my late-season roses. I was knee-deep in my new hobby, learning to identify and preserve plant specimens, when the phone rang with its particular insistence that suggested this wasn't a casual check-in. "Mrs. Peterson?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, slightly hesitant. "This is Sarah from Fletcher Law Offices. Mr. Fletcher asked me to call. He's drafting some paperwork and needs to know if you'd like to make any adjustments to your recent will changes before they're finalized." I set down my plant press and sat at the kitchen table. "What kind of adjustments?" "Well, apparently there's been some family contact. Your daughters have both reached out to Mr. Fletcher about scheduling a meeting with you. They'd like to discuss the estate planning as a family." The family meeting I'd been expecting finally materialized 2 weeks later. James had reserved the small conference room at his office, the one usually used for mediations. The choice of location wasn't lost on me. Neutral territory for what everyone knew might be an emotional conversation. I arrived early, partly from habit, and partly because I wanted a moment to center myself before facing whatever was coming. The room smelled like fresh coffee and that particular scent of anxiety that seems to permeate law offices. Through the window, I could see the historic downtown district, storefronts decorated for Halloween. Normal life carrying on while we prepared for what might be a family reckoning. Rebecca arrived first, looking every inch the professional in a charcoal suit, but I caught the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee pot. Emily followed minutes later, her usual artist casual style upgraded to business. Casual, though her nervous energy filled the room like static electricity. To my surprise, Vicky arrived last. She'd asked to be included, Rebecca explained, as someone who'd inadvertently become part of the situation. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, subdued in a way that suggested she understood the gravity of the moment. James opened with his practiced attorney demeanor. "Let's start by acknowledging that everyone here cares about this family and wants to find the best path forward. Maggie, would you like to explain your perspective on the will changes?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head dozens of times, but sitting there with my daughter's eyes on me, Vicky's presence a tangible reminder of all the changes we'd weathered, the words came differently than I'd planned. "When your father was alive," I began, looking directly at Rebecca and Emily. "He had a way of keeping us all connected. Sunday dinners weren't optional. Birthday calls were made. Family traditions were maintained. After he died, and especially after he remarried, I watched those traditions dissolve. I watched myself become peripheral to lives I'd helped shape for decades." Emily shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we never meant—" "I know what you meant. And what you didn't mean. That's part of the problem. For 3 years, I've been waiting for invitations that came with afterthoughts, included in events as if my presence was a duty rather than a joy." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I'd prepared. "These are all the family gatherings in the past 18 months. Christmas at Vicky's house, invited 3 days before when someone remembered Grandma should probably be included. Emily's promotion party, found out about it through Instagram. Rebecca's anniversary dinner. Emma mentioned it to me during a phone call, and you scrambled to add a place setting." The silence in the room was heavy. Vicky stared at her hands. Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The will changes," I continued, "weren't about punishment. They were about acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that I'd been investing my hopes and resources in relationships that were becoming increasingly one-sided. "But Mom," Rebecca said, her voice careful, "we're here now. We're talking about this. Can't we?" "You're here now because the money forced you here," I interrupted, gently. "Not because you realized I was disappearing from your lives, but because $500,000 was." Emily flinched visibly. "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but it's true. When was the last time either of you came to see me just because you wanted my company? When was the last time you asked about my life instead of just updating me on yours?" James cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss some potential compromises. Maggie, are you open to modifying the current will structure?" I looked around. The table at these people I loved, who loved me but had forgotten how to show it consistently. "I'm open to earn trust. Not demanded, not assumed. Earned." "What does that mean exactly?" Emily asked. "It means actions, not words. It means regular contact that's not about obligation or crisis management. It means acknowledging that I'm a person with interests and needs beyond my roles as mother and grandmother." Vicky spoke for the first time. I think I may have contributed to this problem without realizing it. When I joined this family, I was so focused on finding my place that I didn't consider how my presence might shift existing dynamics." Rebecca turned to her. "Vicky, you can't blame yourself for—" "I'm not blaming myself. I'm acknowledging reality, just like your mother is doing." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. We talked about expectations, about communication, patterns, about how grief had morphed into awkwardness and awkwardness into avoidance. Emily cried twice. Rebecca admitted she'd been treating me like an obligation rather than a choice. Vicky offered to step back from family events where her presence might be too complicated. By the end, we'd reached what James called a provisional agreement. I would revise the will to include more substantial bequests for Rebecca and Emily, but tied to specific conditions: regular contact, defined as weekly check-ins and monthly visits, inclusion in major life events from the planning stages, not as afterthoughts, and acknowledgement of my agency in family decisions. "And if we don't meet these conditions," Emily asked, "then the will reverts to the community distributions," I said simply. "I'm not trying to control your lives. I'm trying to ensure that my presence in them is valued, not taken for granted." We left the meeting emotionally exhausted, but with a clearer understanding. Rebecca hugged me in the parking lot, a real hug, the kind she used to give me when she was little and needed comfort. "I'm sorry, Mom. I got so caught up in my own life that I forgot you were living yours too." Emily waited until Rebecca had driven away before approaching me. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you just tell us how you felt? Why the legal dramatics?" I unlocked my car, considering. "Because I did tell you, in small ways, constantly. But when you're the one always reaching out, always accommodating, your voice gets smaller and smaller until no one can hear it anymore. Sometimes you need a megaphone. $500,000 is quite a megaphone. It's also quite a wake-up call." That weekend, Emily made good on her promise to visit. She arrived Friday evening with a bottle of wine, a bag of groceries, and no agenda beyond spending time together. We cooked dinner together. Nothing fancy, just a simple pasta dish, and talked about everything except wills and family obligations. "You know what I realized?" Emily said, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor after dinner, wineglass in hand. "I don't actually know much about your life, like your actual interests and hobbies and dreams. When did that happen?" "Gradually, over time. It's not that you didn't care. You just assumed you knew everything there was to know about me because I'm your mother." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me something I don't know about you." "I'm learning botanical illustration. I take underwater basket weaving classes. I'm secretly writing a memoir about my 3 decades of teaching." I smiled at her confusion. 2 of those are true. The memoir and basket weaving are real? No, the illustration and memoir, though now I'm considering adding basket weaving to my repertoire. She laughed, really laughed, and I realized how long it had been since we'd shared genuine laughter rather than polite amusement. Saturday morning, she joined me for my ESL class at the library. I watched her interact with my students, Maria with her twins, Hassan with his engineering dreams, elderly Mrs. Kim learning English to communicate better with her grandchildren born here. Afterward, Emily helped organize the book donations that had accumulated over the week. "You've built an entire life I knew nothing about," she said, shelving romance novels alphabetically. "I built it rather than waiting for someone else to invite me into theirs." Sunday brought an unexpected gathering. Rebecca arrived with Emma and her husband David. Yes, the same name as her father, a coincidence that had caused much family discussion during their engagement. To my surprise, Vicky appeared around noon with a basket of homemade scones and a suggestion that we plant bulbs together for a spring garden. We spent the afternoon working in my yard. 3 generations of women and a 4-year-old who thought digging in dirt was the height of entertainment. Emma named each tulip bulb. This one's princess, this one's dragon, this one's pizza because it looks like pizza. As we worked, something shifted. The conversation flowed naturally. Rebecca asked about my botanical illustration progress and actually listened to the answer. Emily showed Vicky photos from her apartment hunting adventures and solicited advice. Vicky shared stories from her yoga classes that had nothing to do with my late husband. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still the sensation of people trying too hard. But it was a beginning. Later, as we sat on the porch drinking tea and eating Vicky's scones, Emma climbed into my lap and announced, "Grandma Maggie, I like when everyone comes to your house." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because you make the best stories and the biggest hugs." Rebecca caught my eye over Emma's head and smiled. "She's right. You do make the best stories." That evening, after everyone had left, I sat in my garden as the sun set. The afternoon's work was visible in the freshly turned soil, tiny promises of spring color buried beneath the surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thanks for today, Mom. Same time next week?" Another text came through moments later from Rebecca. "Emma's been talking about Princess the Tulip all the way home. Can we make this a regular thing?" Even Vicky had sent a message. "Thank you for including me. I know it's complicated, but I appreciate the grace." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked to my mailbox and found an envelope from James's office. Inside was a formal letter confirming the revised will had been filed. Included was a note in James's handwriting. "Proud of how you handled this, Maggie. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money. It's a reminder of how to love each other better." I filed the documents in my desk drawer and made myself dinner. The house felt different tonight. Not empty, but peaceful. Like a space that had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of Vicky's book on my nightstand. On impulse, I opened it for the first time. The dedication page read, "For David, who taught me that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. And for Maggie, who showed me that family isn't about replacing loss, but about growing around it." I read her words about meeting David at the community center, about their whirlwind romance, about his death and her grief. But I also read her acknowledgments of the wife who had loved him first and longest, of the daughters who shaped him as a father, of the importance of honoring what came before while building what comes next. It wasn't the story I would have written, but it was honest, and it was generous, and it acknowledged truths I hadn't expected to find there. I closed the book and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Emily had mentioned wanting to start a family book club, with each generation choosing selections. Rebecca was planning a family reunion for next summer, already asking for my input on dates and locations. Vicky had offered to teach a yoga workshop specifically for seniors at the community center, with me as her first confirmed student. These weren't the solutions I'd imagined when I first walked into James's office 6 months ago, determined to redistribute my assets as a statement about value and attention. But they were better. Because instead of forcing change through financial leverage, we were learning to change through understanding. The will remained revised, serving its purpose as a reminder rather than a punishment. But I suspected that, when the time came, hopefully years in the future, the money would matter far less than the relationships we were rebuilding, one Sunday afternoon at a time. I drifted off to sleep thinking about Emma's named tulip bulbs, about Hassan's upcoming citizenship test that I'd agreed to help him study for, about the botanical illustration class I'd signed up for, wondering if I had any artistic talent lurking, undiscovered at 77. Change, I'd learned, wasn't a single decision or a dramatic gesture. It was a series of small choices, made daily, by everyone involved. It was choosing to show up, to speak honestly, to listen fully, to extend grace while maintaining boundaries. And sometimes, it was remembering that the person who needed the most changing was yourself. Spring arrived with the kind of dramatic flair that makes photographers cancel appointments and gardeners abandon indoor responsibilities. By late May, my garden had transformed into something I barely recognized, not just because of the plants we'd chosen together, but because it had become a testament to what happens when people actually show up for each other consistently. The raised beds that Tom and I had built were now managed by committee, with each family member claiming ownership over sections that somehow still harmonized into a unified whole. Standing at my kitchen window with my morning tea, I watched a cardinal land on the half-finished gazebo frame that had been slowly taking shape over the past month. Today was Saturday, my 78th birthday, and unlike last year, my phone hadn't stayed silent. It had been pinging since 6 a.m. with messages that ranged from Emily's dramatic, "Happy birthday, Mother Dearest," complete with confetti emojis, to Rebecca's more measured but heartfelt voice message about how grateful she was for everything that had changed between us. Even Vicky had sent a message, though hers came with an interesting proposal. "Happy birthday, Maggie. I hope you're ready for a surprise today. Not the kind that involves forgetting, but the kind that celebrates remembering. P.S. The documentary crew might want to film the celebration if that's okay with you. They're fascinated by our journey." I'd spent the past year learning that surprises in this family now came with consent and consideration. A far cry from the assumptions and afterthoughts that had characterized our interactions before my will changing. Wake-up call. The notification sound had shifted from a source of anxiety to something I actually anticipated. Imagine that. Looking forward to hearing from your own children. By 9 o'clock, I was elbow-deep in preparing what had become traditional birthday lemon poppy seed muffins when Tom Chen arrived, his truck loaded with what appeared to be gazebo finishing materials and something covered by a blue tarp. "Special. Delivery for the birthday girl," he announced, tipping his worn baseball cap. Tom had become more than just the hardware store owner who'd helped me channel my frustration into construction projects. He'd become family in that chosen way that sometimes means more than blood relations. "You know I don't like a fuss," I protested, though we both knew I was delighted. "Good thing this isn't a fuss, it's a necessity. Can't have a proper garden party without a proper gazebo, and your granddaughter has been very specific about the timeline. Apparently, Princess Tulip and Pizza Tulip need shade for their upcoming tea party, and I quote, before they get too sun-tired." The front door burst open before I could respond, and Emma exploded into the kitchen with the kind of energy that defies the laws of physics for someone so small. She'd convinced Rebecca to let her wear her favorite purple tutu to help build the gazebo, because construction clothes should be fancy for Grandma's birthday. "Grandma Maggie, we're going to finish your special house today, and then we're having the biggest tea party ever, and Mommy says I can invite my friends Sophie and Mason, and Aunt Emily is bringing her friend Marcus, who knows how to make balloon. Animals, and Vicky said she's bringing special fairy lights that change colors. Rebecca followed more sedately, looking like she'd already had 2 cups of coffee and was calculating how many more she'd need to survive a day of 4-year-old enthusiasm. I tried to tone down her expectations, she said apologetically. But apparently subtlety isn't in a preschooler's vocabulary. Nor should it be, I replied, pulling Emma into a flower-dusted hug. Life's too short for subtle celebrations. Emily arrived 20 minutes later with Marcus in tow, both carrying what appeared to be a professional sound system. For the full experience, Emily explained, seemingly forgetting that my definition of full experience had traditionally involved quiet book reading rather than anything requiring speakers. But something had shifted in me over the past year. Maybe it was the teaching, the botanical illustration classes, the writing workshops, or simply the realization that claiming your space sometimes means letting others fill it with their own kind of joy. I found myself not just tolerating but actually anticipating the controlled chaos that had become our family gatherings. By 10:30, the backyard was a symphony of activity. Rebecca and her husband had taken charge of the technical aspects of gazebo assembly, measuring and remeasuring with the precision that made her such a successful real estate agent. Emily and Marcus were setting up what they'd optimistically called a performance space, though performance of what remained mysterious. Emma flitted between adult groups like a hummingbird, offering unsolicited advice and occasionally picking up tools that were quickly but gently redirected back into adult hands. Vicky arrived at 11 with something that made everyone stop what they were doing. She wasn't alone. Behind her walked a small film crew, 2 people with cameras, 1 with sound equipment, and a woman with a clipboard who had the unmistakable air of someone in charge. "Happy birthday, Maggie," Vicky said, her usual yoga instructor serenity touched with something like nervousness. "I hope this is okay. The documentary team has been so moved by our story, they wanted to capture today. But we can absolutely send them away if this feels like too much." I stood in my garden, flour still on my apron, my family frozen in various states of construction activity, and strangers with cameras waiting for my response. A year ago, this would have felt invasive, overwhelming, a violation of private moments. Today, it felt like an opportunity to show that families can evolve, that even difficult conversations can lead to beautiful places. "Set up wherever you need to," I heard myself saying. "But someone make sure Emma's tutu gets proper screen time. She's been planning this outfit for weeks." The day that followed was unlike any birthday I'd experienced in my 78 years. The gazebo came together with surprising efficiency, though not without the kind of good-natured arguments that arise when multiple people have strong opinions about optimal roof angles. Emma appointed herself narrator for the film crew, explaining in 4-year-old logic how Grandma was sad because nobody remembered her birthday. But then Grandma did something called changing her will, which is like magic that makes people remember you, except not really magic but something grown-ups do with papers. By early afternoon, the gazebo was complete. It stood in the corner of my garden where the morning shade would gradually give way to dappled afternoon sunlight, exactly as Vicky had recommended for optimal meditation energy and practical comfort. The structure was simple but elegant, with a slight Victorian flair that Rebecca had insisted would complement the house's architecture. But the real surprise came after the construction was complete. Emily stood up, cleared her throat, and announced, "We have something we wanted to share. With you, Mom. Something that's been in the works for a while." She pulled out her phone and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement. "Last year, you taught us something important about showing up, about presence, about not taking relationships for granted. We've tried to live those lessons, but we also wanted to do something more permanent." Rebecca took over, pulling out official-looking documents. "We've established the Margaret Peterson Family Education Fund. It's seeded with contributions from all of us, including Vicky. The fund will provide grants to the ESL program at the library. support the writing workshops you've been leading, and expand access to adult education programs in Millbrook? I felt my throat tighten as Emily continued. But that's not all. We've also endowed a scholarship in your name at the high school. It's specifically for non-traditional students, those who've faced interruptions in their education, who've had to prioritize others over their own learning, who've deferred their dreams. The film crew was capturing every moment of this, but I'd forgotten they were there. All I could see were my daughters, who had somehow intuited exactly what would mean more to me than any material gift. And there's one more thing, Vicky said, stepping forward. Together, we're launching a program through the community center. It's called Bridging Generations, and it's based on your model of family communication and connection. We want to help other families before they reach crisis points, before birthdays are forgotten, before relationships need dramatic interventions to survive. Emma, who had been vibrating with suppressed energy throughout this speech, finally exploded. And every year on your birthday, we're going to have a big party in the gazebo with all your favorite people and cake and Emma juice and maybe a piñata, if you want. The laughter that followed was the kind that releases tension and binds people together. I found myself crying, but they were tears of abundance rather than loss. For the first time in years, I felt seen not just as a mother or grandmother, but as a complete person whose contributions extended beyond family roles. The rest of the day unfolded like a well-written story where all the plot threads finally weave together. We hosted the Promise Tea Party, which evolved into something between a garden party and a community celebration. My ESL students appeared. Hassan had finished his citizenship classes and passed his test. Maria had started a small catering business. Mrs. Kim had brought her entire extended family. Tom Chen arrived with his granddaughters, who immediately bonded with Emma over a shared love of naming plants with human characteristics. Former colleagues from my teaching days stopped by, having seen Emily's social media announcements about the celebration. Joyce from across the street brought not just her famous potato salad, but also her new boyfriend, a retired musician who set up his guitar in the gazebo for an impromptu concert that spanned generational preferences. The documentary crew captured it all, but by afternoon, they'd become part of the event rather than observers of it. The sound tech was teaching Emma how to use headphones, the camera operators were getting pulled into group photos, and the director was helping Emily string the color-changing fairy lights that had been promised. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades that rivaled my boldest watercolor attempts, I found myself sitting in my new gazebo, surrounded by 3 generations of family and chosen family. Rebecca had one arm around Emma, who was determinedly staying awake despite the late hour. Emily was showing Marcus old photo albums, pointing out how hairstyles had evolved over decades. Vicky was practicing gentle yoga poses with some of my ESL students, demonstrating modifications for those with arthritis. Tom appeared at my elbow with a fresh cup of tea. "You know," he said, settling onto the bench beside me, "a year ago you were ready to write all this off. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that force other people to make their own decisions." "It wasn't about forcing anything," I replied, watching the lights twinkle in the gathering dusk. "It was about creating space for people to choose. I couldn't make them show up for me, but I could stop making it so easy for them not to." The film director approached, clearly wanting to capture some final thoughts for her documentary. "Margaret, as someone who's watched families struggle with exactly these issues, this transformation is remarkable. What's the most important thing you've learned through this experience?" I thought about how to answer honestly without sounding like a self-help book. I learned that grace isn't the same as martyrdom. I spent years believing that being low maintenance was a loving act, that demanding nothing meant giving everything. But relationships need maintenance and attention, and sometimes difficult conversations. My children are good people who got busy with their own lives. I'm a good mother who got lost in trying to be perfect rather than present. Someone had started a small fire in the portable pit Tom had contributed, and Emma was roasting marshmallows. with intense concentration. Rebecca was helping her achieve the perfect level of gooey without total combustion, while Emily captured the moment with her phone. "Look at them," I continued to the camera. "They're not perfect at this. Neither am I. But we're all trying now, and that's what matters." The will changes were never about the money. They were about shaking everyone, including myself, out of complacency. As if to illustrate the point, my phone rang. It was James Fletcher, calling to wish me a happy birthday and to let me know that the revised will was now complete and filed, with all the conditions we'd negotiated. "The girls have met every requirement," he reported cheerfully. "Regular contact, family involvement, demonstrated consideration. I have to say, Maggie, this might be the most successful use of estate planning as family therapy I've ever witnessed." After the call, I found Rebecca and Emily in conversation with the documentary director, explaining their perspective on the past year. They spoke honestly about their initial resentment at feeling forced to be better daughters, but also about the realization that they had genuinely wanted to reconnect. They just needed the framework to do it. "The thing is," Emily was saying, "we all fell into this pattern where we assumed Mom would always be there. Always understanding, always available on our terms. The will changes forced us to confront what we were actually offering in return." Rebecca nodded. "And once we started really showing up, we remembered why we wanted to. Not because of inheritance pressure, but because this," she gestured, to the gathering around us, "this is actually where we wanted to be all along." The evening wound down gradually, the way the best gatherings do. Parents rounded up sleepy children, elderly neighbors accepted rides home, and Emily's friends helped pack up the sound equipment. But the core family stayed, settling into the quiet that follows celebration. Emma, now in pajamas and wrapped in a blanket, curled up in the gazebo with her head in my lap. "Grandma Maggie, was this the best birthday ever?" "It was quite wonderful. Sweetheart, will you write about it in your storybook?" I'd been keeping a journal throughout this year of changes, originally just for my own clarity, but increasingly as something that might help others navigating similar family situations. "Maybe I will. What should I write about today?" "Write about how the gazebo is magic, and it makes everyone stay longer and laugh more." Vicky, who'd been quietly cleaning up the last of the tea service, paused. "You know, Emma might be onto something. There's something about having a dedicated gathering, space that changes how people interact." "It's not the structure," Tom said, appearing with the last of the folding chairs. "It's the intention. You built this place to bring people together, and that's exactly what it's doing." By 9 o'clock, it was just the core family plus Tom, who'd been adopted into that category through consistent presence and practical support. We sat in the gazebo, battery-operated lanterns casting soft light on tired but content faces. "Can we make this an annual tradition?" Rebecca asked. "The birthday, the gazebo gathering, the larger community celebration? Only if you promise to keep it spontaneous," I replied. "The best part of today was how it grew naturally, how people just showed up because they wanted to be here." Emily grinned. "How about we aim for planned spontaneity? Like, we'll definitely celebrate here, but we'll let the shape of it emerge each year based on who we've become by then." The conversation drifted into planning, ideas for improving the garden space, thoughts about winter gatherings, speculation about whether Emma's friends would become regular fixtures. But underneath the practical discussion was something more profound: the assumption of future together, the confidence that these connections would continue and deepen. As we prepared to call it a night, the documentary director approached for one final interview moment. "Margaret, looking back on this year, from the birthday that started it all to today, what do you hope people take away from your story?" I thought about all the small adjustments and major revelations that had brought us to this moment. "I hope they understand that it's never too late to change family dynamics, but but it takes courage from everyone involved. I hope they see that sometimes what looks like punishment, like changing a will, is actually an invitation to do better. Mostly, I hope they realize that family isn't just about love, it's about showing up with that love consistently. As the film crew packed up their equipment, my daughters began the familiar dance of collecting Emma's scattered toys and preparing for departure. But there was a different quality to this leaving, an assumption of return rather than the old pattern of vague future plans. "Next Saturday?" Emily asked, referring to our now established weekly gathering tradition. "Next Saturday," Rebecca confirmed. "And I'm bringing David's mother. She's been asking to meet everyone properly." Vicky was watering the new plants with the gentleness of someone who understood that care requires consistency. "I'll bring some meditation guides. Tom mentioned he might be interested in starting a practice." Even Emma participated in the planning from her state of exhausted draping across Rebecca's shoulder. "And maybe Sophie can come?" She really liked the fairy lights. They left gradually, each departure marked by genuine hugs and specific future plans. Tom lingered longest, helping me extinguish the fire pit and secure the gazebo for the night. "You did good, Maggie," he said simply. "Not just today, but this whole year. It takes guts to demand better from the people you love." After everyone had gone, I took one final walk through my garden by flashlight. The day's activities had left their marks, footprints in the mulch, a few stray cups to collect, scorch marks around the fire pit. But these weren't damages. They were evidence of life lived fully. I sat once more in the gazebo, now empty but still warm with the energy of the day. My phone had continued chirping periodically with belated birthday wishes, photos from today's celebration, and voice messages from people I hadn't heard from in years who'd somehow learned about the gathering through social media. One message stood out, from James Fletcher's wife. "Happy birthday, Maggie. James tells me your family has really turned things around this year. As someone who works with families in transition, I wanted you to know that what you've accomplished here is remarkable and rare. Most people either accept diminishing relationships or burn bridges completely. You found a third path." I saved the message, thinking it might go well with the documentation I'd been keeping of this year's journey. The documentary would capture one version of our story, but I'd been recording my own observations, the small shifts that cameras might miss. Before going inside, I did something that had become a nighttime ritual. I opened the weather app on my phone, another skill Emily had patiently taught me, to check tomorrow's forecast. Clear skies, temperature in the low 70s, perfect for the Sunday garden club meeting I'd started hosting monthly. But this time, I also checked something else, the sunrise time, 6:15. Early enough for tea and reflection before the day filled with people and plans. There was something beautiful about knowing my days would hold both solitude and community, chosen silence and deliberate connection. As I locked the back door, I caught a glimpse of tomorrow's arrangements. Rebecca had texted earlier that she'd drop Emma off for a grandmother-granddaughter morning before heading to an open house. Emily had mentioned wanting to try watercolor painting with me, now that she'd seen some of my botanical illustrations displayed in the house. Even Vicky had suggested a walking meditation in the garden, just the two of us, to discuss a new initiative. She was considering that would benefit from my educational background. The house felt different as I moved through it, turning off lights and checking windows. Not empty, but expectant in the best possible way. Rooms that had echoed with silence now held the residual warmth of voices, the lingering scent of birthday. Cake and coffee? The subtle disarray of spaces actually lived in and enjoyed. In my bedroom, I found a gift I'd almost missed in the day's excitement. A small jewelry box on my dresser with a note, "Mom, from all of us, including Emma. Open when you have a quiet moment." Inside was a pendant, a delicate silver tree with tiny gemstones for leaves. The accompanying card read, "Like our family tree, many branches, deep roots, and always growing. Thank you for reminding us we're stronger together. I fastened it around my neck, looking at my reflection in the eye. Mirror. 78 years old, silver-haired, wearing jewelry my adult children had chosen together. When had I last felt so completely myself? My phone chimed one final time as I prepared for bed. A group text from the entire family, including Vicky and Tom. Family meeting next Saturday after the regular gathering. On the agenda, planning the documentary premiere party, finalizing the scholarship program, and discussing Emma's request for a family book club. Also, Tom wants to propose a workshop series on practical skills for multiple generations. And Vicky suggests monthly themed dinners. Thoughts? I typed back simply, "Thoughts are, I love you all. See you Saturday. P.S. Emma gets to pick the first book." As I turned off my bedside lamp, I realized that tomorrow would be the day after my 78th birthday. A year ago, that thought would have brought melancholy. Another year older, another celebration forgotten. Tonight, it brought anticipation. Another day to build on what we'd started, to deepen connections we'd renewed, to discover new ways of being family. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, marking the official end of my birthday, but the continuing story of all we were becoming together. In the darkness, I could practically feel the gazebo in the garden, waiting for tomorrow's gathering, for Emma's tea parties and Vicky's meditation sessions, and whoever else would find their way into our expanding definition of family. This, I thought as sleep began to claim me, was what inheritance really meant. Not money or property or even heirlooms, but the gift of showing up for each other, day after ordinary day, birthday after birthday, season after season of growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.